For years, Florida was a shining jewel of America's real estate boom. From Miami's glittering skyline to Tampa's suburban sprawl, money flowed like water. Everyone wanted a piece of paradise. Retirees seeking sun, investors chasing returns, and families dreaming of white picket fences under palm trees. Prices climbed so fast it felt like they would never stop. Politicians boasted about economic growth. Developers broke ground daily, and homeowners watched their property values soar. But beneath that glossy surface, the warning signs were already blinking red. Insurance rates quietly began to skyrocket. Construction materials became more expensive, squeezing builders' margins. Meanwhile, average Floridians found themselves priced out as their wages lagged behind the market's greed. Renters, once hopeful to buy, were locked into paying record-high rents that consumed most of their income. It wasn't sustainable, and deep down, many knew it. Still, few wanted to believe that the Sunshine State's golden era could end. Then interest rates began to rise. Mortgage payments doubled, demand evaporated, and the same homes that once sold in bidding wars suddenly sat unsold for months. Investors, who once bragged about flipping 5 houses a year, started dumping their properties at a loss. The dominoes began to fall, one community, one city, one county at a time. And yet, the state's leadership continued to reassure the public that the market would stabilize. But stabilization never came. Instead, panic did. Families who stretched their budgets to buy at peak prices now found themselves underwater, owing more than their homes were worth. Developers halted projects mid-construction. Local banks started quietly freezing loans. And behind the scenes, whispers began to spread. The Florida housing bubble was finally bursting. The calm before the storm had ended. What followed wasn't just a market correction. It was a reckoning. The same system that promised prosperity had built its foundations on debt and speculation. And as those foundations began to crack, the illusion of endless growth collapsed. Florida, once the poster child of opportunity, was now the cautionary tale of excess. This was just the beginning. And for many, the worst was yet to come. As Florida's housing market began to crumble, the pressure on the governor's office intensified. For months, residents have been pleading for action, begging for relief from soaring insurance premiums, rent hikes, and the tidal wave of foreclosures sweeping across once thriving neighborhoods. But now, with property values plummeting and economic anxiety spreading like wildfire, the governor could no longer stay silent. Cameras rolled, reporters gathered, and all eyes turned to Tallahassee. In a somber tone rarely seen from Florida's leadership, the governor addressed the crisis head-on. He admitted what many already feared. Florida's housing market is facing correction, one unlike anything we've seen in decades. Behind those words was a truth too big to hide. The boom that politicians had celebrated was built on shaky ground. Inflated prices, unchecked speculation, and over-reliance on investors who had treated housing like a casino chip instead of necessity. For years, the state's leaders had encouraged development at breakneck speed, offering incentives to builders and corporate landlords, while ignoring warnings about affordability. Now, thousands of middle-class families were paying the price. Homeowners saw their equity vanish almost overnight. Renters, already stretched thin, faced eviction as landlords panicked to cover their losses. Insurance companies, burdened by repeated storm claims and skyrocketing property values, began to pull out of the state entirely, leaving homeowners stranded and desperate. The governor's team scrambled to contain the fallout. Emergency housing aid was proposed, interest rate freezes were discussed, and quiet calls were made to Washington for federal assistance. But for many, it was too little, too late. The damage was already done. Foreclosure signs multiplied like weeds. Construction halted across several counties, and neighborhoods once filled with optimism now felt eerily quiet. Critics accused the administration of reacting instead of preparing. Economists warned that unless Florida restructured its housing policies, prioritizing long-term stability over short-term profits, the state could face a prolonged recession. And in the midst of all this chaos, a single question echoed across the nation. How did America's hottest real estate market collapse so quickly? The governor promised recovery. But as the cameras turned off and the crowds dispersed, the reality remained unchanged. Thousands were losing their homes. Confidence in leadership was fading, and Florida's sunshine dream was slipping into shadow. When the Florida housing market started unraveling, the first to sense the tremors weren't the families or the small-time landlords. It was the investors. The same Wall Street firms, hedge funds, and private equity giants that had once bought Florida homes by the thousands suddenly went silent. The buying frenzy stopped. The open houses that once had bidding wars turned eerily empty. It was the beginning of the investor exodus. For years, these institutional buyers had treated Florida like a gold mine. Companies like BlackRock, Invitation Homes, and other major players poured billions into neighborhoods, scooping up single-family homes and turning them into rental empires. The business model was simple: buy cheap, rent high, and hold until prices skyrocketed. Now, that strategy had proven. Mortgage rates had soared above 7%, construction costs had doubled. Ordinary people simply couldn't afford to buy. The renters they relied on to make profits were now falling behind on payments, and vacancies began to climb. As profits dried up, the big investors began dumping properties. Quietly at first, then all at once, entire subdivisions that had been corporate-owned hit the market, flooding it with inventory and driving prices even lower. Smaller landlords panicked, tried to offload homes before values dropped further. It was a domino effect, and every tile that fell pulled another down with it. Meanwhile, ordinary Floridians watched in disbelief. The same corporations that helped drive up prices were now walking away, leaving neighborhoods half empty and local economies gasping for air. Construction crews were laid off, new developments were canceled, and even the tourism sector, long Florida's economic backbone, felt the shock as fewer people were able to afford second homes or vacation rentals. The governor's office tried to assure the public that this was a natural market correction, but few believed it. Real estate agents reported desperate sellers slashing prices by 20 to 30%. Banks began tightening lending standards, fearing another foreclosure wave. The once booming towns of Fort Myers, Naples, and Orlando were now headlines for all the wrong reasons. Florida homes down 40% in 6 months. By the end of the year, billions had evaporated from the market. Investors had fled. Families were trapped in underwater mortgages. And the dream of Florida paradise had become a cautionary tale for the rest of America.